The Curse of Anubis, a journey through ancient Egyptian mysteries. The sands of time have buried many secrets beneath the golden dunes of Egypt, where ancient gods once walked among men, and their whispers still linger in the wind. Among these gods was Anubis, the jackal-headed deity, guardian of the afterlife, and the keeper of secrets that should never be known. This is the story of how one man's quest for power unraveled a curse that had been sealed for millennia, a curse that threatened to plunge the world into eternal darkness. In the heart of Cairo, in the year 1923, a young and ambitious archaeologist named Dr. Marcus Elwood stood on the brink of the greatest discovery of his life. The scorching sun beat down on the excavation site as his team unearthed what appeared to be the entrance to a long-forgotten tomb, hidden beneath the shifting sands of the Sahara. The tomb was unlike any other, a massive stone structure adorned with intricate hieroglyphs and carvings of Anubis, the god of mummification and the afterlife. As the team cleared away the debris, Marcus noticed something peculiar. A large, circular stone seal embedded in the entrance, inscribed with a warning in ancient Egyptian script. It read, "He who disturbs the resting place of Anubis shall invoke the wrath of the god and unleash the curse upon the world." Ignoring the warning, driven by the promise of fame and fortune, Marcus ordered the seal to be broken. With a resounding crack, the seal shattered, and the heavy stone door creaked open, revealing a dark passageway leading into the depths of the tomb. The air inside was stale, carrying the scent of decay and something else, something that sent a shiver down Marcus's spine. Torch in hand, Marcus led his team into the tomb, the walls closing in around them as they descended deeper into the earth. The flickering light cast eerie shadows on the walls, where depictions of Anubis performing the ancient rites of mummification seemed to come alive. The further they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became, as if the tomb itself was alive, watching their every move. At the end of the passageway, they entered a vast chamber, the burial chamber of a pharaoh long forgotten by history. In the center of the room lay a grand sarcophagus, its lid adorned with the likeness of Anubis. The likeness of Anubis was etched into the lid, his expression calm but menacing. Surrounding the sarcophagus were treasures beyond comprehension, golden statues of the gods, bejeweled artifacts, and a treasure trove of ancient scrolls containing spells and incantations in a language long lost to time. But it was the figure engraved on the side of the sarcophagus that caught Marcus's attention, a man, or perhaps a god, dressed in the regalia of a high priest, with eyes made of pure lapis lazuli that seemed to glow in the torchlight. This, Marcus realized, was no ordinary burial. This was the final resting place of a figure who had once held immense power, a high priest of Anubis, chosen to be the deity's mortal vessel in the world of the living. As Marcus's hand hovered over the sarcophagus, the torches flickered, and a chill swept through the chamber. Ignoring the growing sense of dread, he ordered the lid to be removed. With great effort, the team pried it open, revealing the mummified remains of the priest. The mummy was adorned in ornate robes, with amulets and jewelry encrusted with precious gems, a gold mask in the likeness of Anubis covering its face. The mummy's wrappings were remarkably well preserved, their pristine condition defying the centuries that had passed. The air around the mummy was thick, almost suffocating, as if the very essence of death lingered close. As Marcus leaned closer to examine the mummy, something caught his eye, a small, intricately carved obsidian scarab clutched in the mummy's hand, its surface etched with symbols of protection. But when Marcus reached out to take the scarab, the ground beneath him trembled. The chamber filled with an oppressive darkness, and the air became heavy with the scent of incense and decay. The eyes of the jackal statues seemed to glow brighter, and the shadows in the room began to move, as if alive. Suddenly, a low growl reverberated through the chamber, and the team watched in horror as the mummy's eyes, hidden beneath the gold mask, began to glow with an unnatural, piercing light. The wrappings around the mummy's chest and arms slowly unraveled, moving as if by their own accord. The high priest was waking from his eternal slumber. Panic set in as the team scrambled to escape, but the entrance they had come through had somehow sealed itself, trapping them inside. Marcus's heart raced as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. In his arrogance, he had awakened something far more powerful and dangerous than he had ever imagined. The mummy, now fully animated, sat up with a slow, deliberate motion, the sound of ancient bones creaking filling the chamber. The air grew colder with each passing second, and a palpable sense of doom hung over them. The priest's eyes locked onto Marcus, who felt an overwhelming pressure in his chest, as if the weight of millennia of anger and pain bore down on him. From the mummy's open mouth came a voice, deep and resonant, filled with ancient authority. "You have desecrated the resting place of the Chosen One," it intoned. "By the will of Anubis, you shall pay for your transgression with your life and the lives of all those you hold dear." The walls of the chamber began to shift and change, the hieroglyphs glowing with an eerie light as they came to life. The images of souls in torment seemed to move, their cries of agony echoing through the chamber. Shadows coalesced into the forms of jackal-headed spirits, emerging from the walls and surrounding the team, their eyes glowing with malice. Marcus watched in terror as the priest raised his hand, pointing directly at him. A wave of darkness surged forward, enveloping him and his team in a suffocating void. The torches were extinguished, and the chamber was plunged into total darkness. In the pitch-black silence, the only sound was the beating of Marcus's heart, loud and frantic in his ears. When the darkness lifted, Marcus found himself alone in the chamber, the bodies of his team lying lifeless around him. The treasures and artifacts were gone, replaced by crumbling stone and dust. The sarcophagus was empty, the mummy vanished without a trace. The only thing left was the cursed scarab, now lying at Marcus's feet. Desperate and terrified, Marcus fled the tomb, emerging into the harsh light of day as if waking from a nightmare. But the curse was not so easily escaped. As he made his way back to Cairo, he began to notice the effects of his actions. The once thriving villages he passed were now desolate, the inhabitants sick and dying. The Nile, the source of life for all of Egypt, had turned black and foul, its waters no longer able to sustain life. Word spread quickly of the strange and deadly events that followed in Marcus's wake. Plagues of locusts devoured the crops, sandstorms ravaged the land, and the dead rose from their graves, their souls bound to the will of Anubis. Marcus knew that the curse was spreading, and that it would not stop until the world had paid for his transgression. The desert night was eerily silent as Marcus made his way back to the tomb, the oppressive heat of the day giving way to a bone-chilling cold that seeped into his very soul. The sky was shrouded in a thick veil of clouds, obscuring the stars that had once guided his way. It was as if the heavens themselves were mourning the impending doom, withholding their light from the cursed land below. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing with the weight of his impending fate. The scarab in his hand seemed to pulse with a life of its own, its obsidian surface warm against his skin, as if drawing strength from his fear. He knew what had to be done, yet the gravity of the task made his legs tremble with each step he took toward the entrance of the tomb. The dunes had shifted, almost as if the sands themselves had recoiled from the place, exposing the once hidden entrance fully to the night. The obelisks that flanked the entrance stood like silent sentinels, their once proud inscriptions now glowing faintly in the dim light, as if beckoning him forward. The warning carved into the stone was clearer now, its meaning more sinister as he passed beneath it. Here lies the resting place of Anubis chosen. Disturb not the sleep of the dead, lest the wrath of the guardian be unleashed. As he crossed the threshold into the tomb, the world above seemed to vanish. The silence became all-encompassing, broken only by the sound of his breathing and the soft shuffle of his feet against the stone floor. The air grew thick and musty, laden with the scent of ancient incense and something far more unsettling, the stench of decay, of death long undisturbed. The passageway seemed longer this time, twisting and turning in ways that defied logic, as if the tomb itself was shifting, trying to trap him within its depths. The murals on the walls flickered in the light of his torch, the painted figures seeming to move and writhe in the periphery of his vision. The scenes they depicted had changed, no longer the serene and orderly world of the living, but now a hellish landscape where the dead roamed, their eyes hollow and accusing. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Marcus reached the burial chamber. The air was colder here, biting at his skin even through his clothes. The chamber was just as he remembered it, yet there was an undeniable sense of change, as if the very stones themselves had become imbued with a malevolent energy. The jackal statues seemed to watch him with greater intensity, their eyes burning with a dark, otherworldly fire. In the center of the chamber, the sarcophagus lay open and empty, a gaping void that seemed to suck the warmth from the room. The treasures that had once surrounded it were gone, replaced by shadows that clung to the walls, whispering secrets in a language long forgotten. But it was the stone dais that drew his attention now, for upon it, the priests had prepared the altar for the ritual of redemption. The altar was simple, yet undeniably powerful. It was carved from the same black granite as the sarcophagus, its surface inscribed with hieroglyphs that glowed with an ethereal light. At its center was a shallow depression, just large enough to hold the scarab, and around it were 4 small indentations. Each filled with a different substance: dried lotus petals, a pinch of sand from the Nile's shore, a fragment of bone, and a drop of the priest's own blood, now dried and darkened with age. Marcus hesitated for a moment, his gaze fixed on the altar. He knew the ritual required more than just the placement of the scarab. It required a sacrifice, a payment to the gods for the desecration of the tomb and the release of the curse. The priests had been clear: only a life willingly given could appease Anubis and restore balance to the world. With a deep breath, Marcus stepped forward and placed the scarab into the depression at the center of the altar. As soon as the scarab touched the stone, the room seemed to hum with energy, a low, resonant vibration that filled the air and made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. The hieroglyphs around the altar flared to life, their light growing brighter and more intense, casting long, flickering shadows across the chamber. A sudden wind swept through the room, extinguishing his torch and plunging the chamber into darkness. Marcus's breath caught in his throat as the temperature plummeted, the cold now so intense it felt as if his very blood was freezing in his veins. The darkness was absolute, oppressive, pressing in on him from all sides, and within it, he could hear the faint sound of whispers, low, guttural voices speaking in the ancient tongue of the dead. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they became a deafening roar that echoed through the chamber, shaking the very foundations of the tomb. The ground beneath his feet trembled, and from the shadows emerged the figure of the high priest, his mummified form glowing with an unholy light. The priest's eyes, those terrible, glowing orbs, locked onto Marcus, and in that moment, he knew there was no escape. The priest raised his hand, and the scarab on the altar began to levitate, suspended in midair by an invisible force. The hieroglyphs on the altar shifted and changed, forming new words, new incantations that Marcus could not understand but felt deep within his soul. The air around him crackled with energy, and a dark mist began to rise from the ground, swirling around the altar and the priest in a slow, deliberate dance. Marcus knew the time had come. With trembling hands, he reached into his pocket and drew out the small, ceremonial dagger the priests had given him, a blade forged in ancient times, said to be capable of cutting the veil between life and death. He hesitated only for a moment before plunging the dagger into his palm, drawing a thin line of blood that dripped onto the altar. The effect was immediate. The mist around the altar thickened, becoming almost solid as it wrapped itself around Marcus's bleeding hand, pulling him closer to the stone. The scarab began to spin, faster and faster, until it was nothing but a blur of black and gold. The hieroglyphs on the altar flared one last time, burning so brightly that Marcus had to shield his eyes. A voice, deep, ancient, and resonant, filled the chamber, speaking not in words, but in thoughts and emotions, directly into Marcus's mind. It was the voice of Anubis himself, the god of the dead, and it carried with it the weight of millennia, of countless souls judged and guided to the afterlife. "Mortal," the voice intoned, "you have disturbed the balance between life and death. You have awakened that which should have remained asleep. Now, you seek redemption. Are you prepared to pay the price?" Marcus's throat was dry, his voice barely a whisper as he answered, "Yes." The mist surged forward, enveloping Marcus completely. He could feel it seeping into his skin, his veins, his very soul, pulling him down into the darkness. His mind was filled with visions, images of the ancient world, of the high priest's life, of the rituals performed in Anubis's name. He saw the construction of the tomb, the priest's willing sacrifice to become Anubis's vessel, and the curse that had been placed upon the land to protect his resting place. As the mist consumed him, Marcus realized that the sacrifice required was not just his life, but his soul. He was to become the new guardian, the new vessel of Anubis's power, bound to the tomb for all eternity. His life, his memories, his very essence would be absorbed into the scarab, ensuring that the curse would never again be unleashed upon the world. But there was no fear in Marcus's heart now, only acceptance. He had set this chain of events in motion, and he would be the one to end it. With his last breath, he surrendered to the mist, allowing it to take him, to bind him to the ancient power of the gods. The chamber fell silent once more, the mist dissipating as quickly as it had come. The scarab returned to its place on the altar, now glowing with a soft, inner light. The hieroglyphs faded, leaving the stone cold and dark. The high priest's figure vanished, his task complete. And Marcus, now the eternal guardian, rested within the tomb, his soul forever entwined with the power of Anubis. The curse was lifted, the balance restored, and the tomb sealed itself once more, hidden beneath the shifting sands of time. Centuries would pass, and the tale of the cursed tomb would become legend, whispered by those who dared to venture into the desert. But the tomb would remain undisturbed, its secrets buried deep within the earth, guarded by the silent, unseen presence of Marcus, the man who had dared to challenge the gods and paid the ultimate price. And so, the curse of Anubis was contained, waiting for the day when another would come, drawn by the lure of ancient power, and the cycle would begin anew.